Neal Winokur, you are a CPA, which means Certified Public Accountant. You are a CA, which is Chartered Accountant, and you have created history. You are the only man in humankind who have written an interesting accounting book. Neil, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
So, Neil, can we start? I would like to get uh, going into your book, but can we start by you giving us a little bit of background? What were you thinking when you were 17 years old that led you to this horrible career to be an accountant?
Yeah, when I was in business school, in university, undergrad, and I had to decide which field I wanted to focus on, most people in the school I went to at York University, most people went into accounting, and I was always good at math and accounting, so I just did it, even though I enjoyed some of the other subjects more. I enjoyed marketing and organizational behavior, but I just went into accounting because what else am I going to do, right? So I fell into it and I worked in small accounting firms where the focus was on tax, filing tax returns. And that's what started this whole thing.
Well, at one time when I was going to a school as well, I considered accounting because the quote unquote job security. I said, well,
Right.
it's a boring job, but at least I know that I'm going to always have a job. So I
Yeah.
considered that. But then I went into finance, and so
Yeah.
that was my route. So okay, so you graduated with accounting, and then what?
Well, I graduated. I started working in smaller accounting firms here in Toronto, outside of Toronto. And eventually, once I got my designation, my CA designation, I started my own practice. I went out on my own because I hated working for other people. I really didn't enjoy it. And I knew I wanted to be my own boss and have my own, set my own hours and control what I do and how I work. And so I started my own practice, and for the past 7 years, my practice has grown very nicely, but so has my grumpiness and frustration with the Canadian tax system.
Okay, before we go any farther, I went to your LinkedIn profile and it looks amazing. You have these words behind your name, CPA and CA, and I know what it is, but the average Canadian, they just know it means something. But can you tell us what does that mean?
So today, all new accountants in Canada are CPAs, Chartered Professional Accountant. CA is the old designation. They call it the let because there used to be CA, CGA, CMA, all different types of accounting designations. They've merged all three into one in most provinces now. So everyone who is a CA, CGA, or CMA automatically became CPA, Chartered Professional Accountant, but we still get to put CA after our CPA. So really, it's just fancy. It's more fancy letters that mean the same thing. So just because it says CPA CA, they're basically the same thing. I'm a CPA, Chartered Professional Accountant.
Well, it looks good for your LinkedIn profile. I mean, the
Yeah,
more
yeah,
letters you have after your name,
yeah.
the more
Yeah.
clients are impressed. And okay, so you got a job as an accountant. And what was wrong with having a job? I mean, don't accountants get paid well? Why do you have to quit your job and develop your own career?
Well, I decided to start my own accounting practice as an accountant. So, I mean, there's many different types of accounting and fields of accounting that people can work in. There's auditing, forensic accounting, tax, public accounting, people, accountants work in government. Every large organization has an accounting department. So there's so many different types. But what I knew I wanted to be on my own. So I work as an accountant right now. My clients I help them file their tax returns, personal tax returns, small business tax returns. And that's what led me to write my book, The Grumpy Accountant. But yeah, accounting, it's a great profession. And there is, like you were saying, that job security. There's always jobs for accountants in all different types of fields and different areas of accounting.
But why on your own? You couldn't get along with other. You were grumpy right from being an employee. You couldn't get along, or you just have that entrepreneurial itch that you just need to be on your own.
I had the entrepreneurial itch, and I love that phrase, entrepreneurial itch. And I've used that phrase before because most of my clients are entrepreneurs. They're small business owners themselves, right? So I deal with them all the time, and I love dealing with entrepreneurs. And yeah, I had that entrepreneurial itch. Every job I had, I worked in four different accounting firms in the span of 4 years. Like I kept switching, and I mean, some of the jobs I liked and some I didn't. And it was just that feeling of like not being in control and having to work for someone else. And you know that they're profiting off of the fruits of my labor. That's not a great feeling, right? So,
Right.
but you have to put in your time. I had to article and get my experience until I can get my designation. And, you know, there's a lot to learn. So you have to work for other people at the start. But once I felt like, okay, that's enough, I think I can probably do this, I decided to try it out and go on my own.
Okay, before we move on to the grumpy accountant, for a kid that is in college right now and is looking at accounting,
Hmm.
what would you recommend? Should they specialize in one area of accounting versus another one? Should they be a generalist? Should they get a job with an accounting firm, or should they go on their own? This of course is too broad, but just give us your take on that.
Yeah, it's a great profession. So, and I've spoken to people at that age. They're in college, university, and they're thinking about accounting. And I tell them, look, it's a great profession to be in. You get your designation CPA, and it doesn't really matter whether you work in a public accounting firm that does auditing or tax, or whether you work in-house in a accounting department of a company, or in government, or in the big banks, or finance, oil and gas, wherever you work, if you work towards getting your CPA designation, it opens up so many doors. Recruiters will start calling and emailing you as soon as you get those three letters CPA, at least here in Canada. I don't, and in the US, I assume it's similar because it's a great background to have. If you know you want to start your own business one day, that has nothing to do with accounting, but you study accounting in university and you work for a few years in accounting, you learn so much about business because you see books, the bookkeeping and financial statements and tax returns. I learned a lot working in those other accounting firms and being on my own, having my own clients in all different industries and businesses. I see all of these businesses that are much more successful than mine. And I think, why am I an accountant? I should be doing what my clients are doing and making a lot more money. So it's a great background and you learn so much. So even if you think, I don't want to be an accountant for the next 60 years of my life, well, maybe you just do it for 5 or 10 years, you learn a lot, and then you could go into all different types of areas, whether accounting or anything else.
Okay, being that my podcast talks a lot about money, on the ballpark, what could be the expectation for a person of income for a person going into the accounting field? Let's say the first 3 years or some as an employee.
I mean, I think starting salaries here in Canada for a articling CPA student can vary. Could be anywhere from 40 to 50,000 or more. I guess it depends where exactly you're working, how big the firm is. I'm not 100% sure because I haven't, I was in that stage a long time ago. But certainly, once you have your designation, it's a very well-paid job. And if you go out on your own, public accounting people do very well. And there's salary surveys. You can even go online, and the provincial institutes like CPA Ontario and for each province, they have salary surveys they issue every year, and they show how much accountants make on average in all different types of areas and fields of accounting. So there's a lot of information out there where all this information is out there. You just have to find it.
Okay, and I was being sarcastic when I said that the accounting career is boring. Can you just bring us some reality? Is it boring? Is it exciting? What's your take?
I think it depends on the person and depends on what specific field of accounting you're doing. For example, forensic accounting could actually be very interesting. There's forensic accountants who work specifically in certain government departments or public accounting firms where they try and find um, money that's financing terrorism and other crimes and financial crimes. And so, in some ways, that could be very exciting. I mean, now what I do, tax, like when you're filing tax returns, I don't know if it's so exciting. Although sometimes it is because I'm kind of like figuring out pieces of a puzzle in terms of tax planning for small business owners. So I don't think it's all 100% boring, but it depends on the person. Some people do find it boring and other people don't. I think it depends on the personality. It depends on what specific fields you're working in.
Right. So you do a specific income tax for business and for individuals, right?
Yes. Yes.
Isn't the software, all this software available to individuals, aren't they kind of biting into your job? You're not going to be out of business because this software gets more and more sophisticated?
It's interesting. Over the years, more and more Canadians are using TurboTax, UFile, Simple Tax, Studio Tax. There's all of these online softwares out there now that people can use. And maybe they pay $20 or $40 or something. So I think something like 8 million Canadians net file their tax returns now. And net file means you're using one of those softwares. So that's a lot. A lot of people are doing it on their own. They have simple tax situations. They can do it on their own, and that's great. For people like me, our business still grows every year. We get new clients all the time because the tax system is still way too complicated. So as soon as someone decides they buy a rental property and they start earning rental income, or they have their own business and they're self-employed, or they get married and they have kids and now their tax situation becomes more complicated, they can't figure it out on their own, or even if they could, they don't want to spend 20 hours, right? They'd rather just, okay, you know what, I'll just pay you, you do it, take care of it. So I'm not worried about losing business to it. Now, if the ideas in my book become reality, then yes, I would have to find a new job. So, and we could talk about my book soon, but yeah, the point is that our tax system is way too complicated. So the software only really helps people with simple tax situations. And as soon as people get into the more complicated, they can't use that software. They need to come to people like us.
Well, I tell you, Neil, it's almost like black magic. I open the software, I really don't know what's going on. I just put those numbers in that the software suggests, and then it spits out like 20 pages. And I go, every year I have looked through those pages, and there's no way in hell that I could do that by hand. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just take this number, then divide it by X, then take it to this column, but then don't put it in the other column. And it's just,
Yeah.
it just drives me crazy not to understand what's going on. And I mean, that's the path. So far, I haven't gotten arrested, but but
Yeah.
it's just crazy not to know what's going on. Okay,
Yeah.
so you have been working on your own, and what drove you to write this book? I mean, this book is almost like committing suicide. Like you said, if some of the ideas are implemented in this book, you're gonna have to change careers.
Look, it's just like you said. You put the numbers into the software, you answer their questions, it spits out this 20-page thing, and you have no idea what's going on. So, the reason why I wrote the book, The Grumpy Accountant, is because what I do for a living, okay, filing tax returns for people, it's a job, when you really think about it, that should not exist. My job should not exist. People should be able to file their own tax returns or not even have to file a tax return at all. And we could still have taxes being paid, but it should be without filing for the majority of people. And I talk about that in the book. But my opinion, what I feel is that if you think about it like this, imagine every other bill that you receive, your phone bill, the rent you pay, or your mortgage that you pay, your car insurance, all of these other bills that we pay every year or every month, your utility bill, for example. How, how do those bills work? The company sends you a bill and it shows the amount owing and you pay it. And that's it. And you don't need to spend hours and hours figuring it out. You don't need to download software to figure out what the bill is. You don't need to hire a bill filing professional like me to file it for you. We don't spend um, we don't have like a department like Canada Revenue Agency or like where they can go back in the past 6 years or 3 years or 10 years and start reassessing your bills from prior years and giving you reassessments. And then you have to file objections and appeals, and can go all the way to tax court. It's so ridiculous what we do with our tax bill because what we've done is we've riddled the tax return with countless deductions and credits. And it's those deductions and credits that I can't stand, because all we have to do is eliminate, abolish every deduction and credit and just lower the tax rate. So you shouldn't have a complicated tax. Your tax return should be the size of a postcard. It can even be the size of a business card. This could be the tax return. Your income, 5% or 10% or whatever it is, taxes payable, done. Get rid of the, and this is what I talk about in my book. And I show the numbers of how this could actually work and even be revenue neutral to the government. So I'm not talking about abolishing income tax. We could keep the government can collect the same amount of revenue it collects right now, but just do it in a much simpler way so that people can file their own tax returns. They won't need to download tax software. They wouldn't need to hire grumpy accountants like me. And they wouldn't need to spend money to file their tax returns and not understand what's going on. The tax bill should be like every other bill you receive, just like your phone bill. It's funny if you stop the average person on the street and you say, "Hey, what's your phone bill every month? What do you pay for rent? Or what's your mortgage payment? What's your car payment?" People will know the answer off the top of their head. They know what they pay. Now ask them, how much taxes did you pay last year? What was your actual taxes payable on line 450 of your tax return or line 435? They'll be like, what? I don't know. What do you mean? I got a refund. I didn't pay tax. I got a big refund. No, you paid tax every paycheck throughout the year. It was taken off. So people don't know. And then line 435 of my tax return, they wouldn't even know where to find that, right? So nobody knows how much tax they're actually paying. They don't know how to file their tax returns. It's absurd. It's an absurd tax system. And I really believe we need to simplify it as much as possible and as soon as possible. My job should not exist. And that's why I wrote the book. I want to spread this message. I really strongly believe it.
Yeah, but according to your book, most of those credits and deductions are because voters have, or politicians have promised voters, hey, if you vote for me, I'll give you, I don't know, a discount on a wheelchair. And if you vote for me, I'll give you a discount on transportation for your kids to go to school or your
Right.
pencil colors or whatever. So then
Exactly.
every year there's a new line, and
Yeah.
now I'm stuck with having to read through these hundreds of lines to see which one of those lines could be applicable to me. And if I don't know
Right.
any better, I'm just confused, and then I
Yeah.
have to hire you.
Exactly. And both major political parties in Canada have they love doing this. So for example, in 2015, before 2015, we had the Conservative government under Prime Minister Harper, and they added a lot of tax credits: child fitness tax credit, child arts tax credit, public transit tax credit, home renovation tax credit. There were a lot more than that also. And then in 2016, the Liberal government took power, Justin Trudeau. They eliminated all of the tax credits, or a lot of the tax credits from the previous government, but then they added their own. So the Liberal government added in a tax credit for teachers to claim school supplies and a climate action incentive tax credit, all sorts of other tax credits they added in. The problem with all these credits and deductions is they're constantly changing, so no one remembers and no one knows. People have to hide. They can't file their own tax returns because they're afraid they'll miss something. And the other big problem with these credits and deductions is everyone's forced to keep receipts for every little expense. So if you put your kids in a soccer program or in baseball or softball or dance lessons or art or whatever, then you have to keep those receipts. And then the CRA has to hire more people to verify. And the CRA, the Canada Revenue Agency's budget is almost $5 billion a year. There's 44,000 employees at the CRA. Now in the United States, the IRS has about 80,000 employees. Now compare that 40,000 to 80,000. The US has 10 times the population of Canada. So why does the IRS only have double the amount of employees at CRA? They should have 10 times the amount. But something is off in the Canadian tax system. We've made it too complicated, and we have thousands of employees at the CRA who have to audit our donation receipts and our medical expenses and our I had teachers, clients of mine who are teachers, who have to send in all the receipts, hundreds of receipts to prove that they paid school supplies. And it's only worth $150 on their tax return, but they have to spend more than that on accounting fees, and the CRA has to spend more than that to help people. So it's so ridiculous, and it's my biggest pet peeve. And politicians love it. They love tax credits and deductions because it buys votes, it's popular with voters. But the other reason is, and this is more philosophical, people in government have this idea that the masses of citizens can't run our own lives according to our own,
Mhm.
responsibility and our own rational kind of self-interest. They need to micromanage our life. So every single life event and milestone has a tax credit or deduction. So they think we're not going to save money if we don't have RRSPs and TFSAs, and they think, well, you have your child in daycare, we're going to give a child care deduction because we want you to go back to work. And if you have extra medical expenses, you need a medical expense tax credit. You need a tax credit for this and a tax credit for that and a deduction for this. So every event and every milestone in life has a credit or deduction. Why? Why do we need all this? Just lower the tax rates and get rid of the credits and deductions. And that's fair for everyone because some of these deductions and credits are helping people who don't really need it. Like you have very wealthy people who make a lot of donations and they get a big break on their taxes because of their donation tax credit. Do they really need that break? Like, I mean, it doesn't. And the same thing with RSP deduction. 90% of RSP contribution room in Canada is unused. People can't afford to contribute to their RSP. So now more people have been contributing to their TFSA, but it just shows uh, some of these deductions and credits are helping people who might not really need the help anyway. So it's pretty like the Canada Child Benefit money that the government gives people for like my wife and I, we receive the Canada Child Benefit for $1. We got like 100 something dollars a month. Okay, but we're paying thousands and thousands of dollars in income tax. I don't need that $100 a month. That's ridiculous. I'm paying thousands of dollars in income tax every month. What I need is a break on the income tax, right? So this is what's happened is over the past 50 years, our tax system has become more and more complicated, and governments don't have the courage to kind of do a comprehensive review of the entire system. They just tinker with it,
Right.
tinkering, and they're not looking at the whole system. And over the years, it's just become this like monstrosity. And what I call for in my book, in The Grumpy Accountant, is we need to do a review of the whole system, simplify it, make things easier for everyone.
Well, no, the first thing I had to tell you is calm down, please.
I can't. I
The
can't calm down. I can't.
second thing is that you are a person that your tools of work are a calculator, a pencil, and a spreadsheet. And this is a very nice, entertaining book. I mean, actually, it is the only entertaining tax book that I have ever read in my life. So, how do you pull that off? And can you tell us more or less what's the story in the book?
Yeah, when I started writing it, I wasn't exactly sure what it would become and how to write it. So at first, I was just writing down all my thoughts and it wasn't organized. But then I happened to pick up a copy of a book called The Wealthy Barber. The Wealthy Barber was written by David Chilton. He wrote an updated version called The Wealthy Barber Returned. It's a great book and it's about personal finance. But the original, The Wealthy Barber, which became a huge bestseller, sold millions of copies, it reads as a story. It's like you're reading a novel. And he took information which is complicated and hard to digest, and he wrote it as like a story, so it's a lot easier to read. And that's when I thought that's what the Grumpy Accountant should be. So I wrote the Grumpy Accountant as a story. It's like a novel almost. And it's about Jerry and George and Elaine. And Jerry symbolizes the typical Canadian and he's bumbling through the tax system at every stage in life. So the story starts with Jerry graduating from college or university, and he starts his first job, and it goes all the way through his life cycle. I don't want to give the whole story away, so I won't. But his grumpy accountant George helps him through the tax system at each stage in life. So when you're reading the book, you're reading like a conversation in a way between Jerry and George, so it's much easier to read, and it's I wrote it in a way that's kind of sarcastic and funny and entertaining. So, and that's the feedback I've been receiving. It's very easy to read. I didn't write it for accountants. It's written in plain, easy language so everyone can understand it because that's my ultimate goal. I want millions of people to read it and take the message to heart and then put pressure on our politicians to implement the ideas in the book.
Okay, right. But my question is how you, who is dealing with a spreadsheet all day long and your calculators, how do you learn to write? I mean, this is a complete different set of skills.
I discovered I have a love and passion for writing. So before I wrote the book, I started to write articles and blogs, and I would send them out to my email newsletter. I have an email list which consists of my clients and family and friends and just other people who've joined the list. And I would write articles and sometimes they were just giving information, tax updates, but sometimes they were my opinions. Like, for example, whenever there's an election in Canada or in Ontario, I would write articles about the political parties and their platforms and what I thought about them. And I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed writing. And I just started to write the book. I would open Microsoft Word. I just started typing. Whatever was in my head, I just typed it as if I was saying it. So I think the trick to writing is if you write, like at least for me, I write as I talk. So
Right.
it's funny when my friends read the book, my family and friends who've read the book, they say, Neal, because they know me as the author, it feels like I'm talking to them. It feels like I'm ranting to them, and they
Right.
enjoy it. And I had an editor, obviously. If you're going to write a book, you must have a real editor, a professional editor, and she was great. She did a great job.
Okay, okay. So going into the book, and this is just for average Canadian uh, to kind of know how much they are paying. We have Jerry on his first year as an employee. He goes to the accountant George, and George does his taxes. Now, on a person like this, someone who has a job for the first time and they get their T4 and they have some deductions and student loans and what give, what would be the average rate that, let's say, on Ontario, that a person could pay for individual taxes like that?
Yeah, I mean, if someone, let's say they make, 40 to 50,000 a year, they'll have deducted from their paycheck. There's not just income tax, there's CPP and EI, Canada
Right.
Pension Plan, employment insurance. In the United States, there's also taxes that come off their checks as well. Um, I'm not a US tax expert, but they have similar things. Social Security, Medicare, there's all those deductions. So if you're making, let's say someone's making 40 to 50,000 a year on Ontario, they'll pay CPP around, maybe around $2,000, $800 of EI, employment insurance, and then income tax maybe four, five, $6,000. So it's quite significant for people at that level of income. And that's really one of the things I think we need to think about if we redesign our tax system is that people at that level of income, I don't think should be burdened with such a high income tax bill because it really takes a chunk out, especially people who are still paying off student loans and the cost of living has increased so much in every major city in Canada, or at least Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, real estate prices have gone up. It's very expensive to live now. So, I mean, some people are just saying, you know what, I won't live in Toronto and they'll move to other places, which is kind of smart when you think about it. But the tax system hasn't really, the tax rates haven't really been updated to kind of reflect the fact that cost of living has gone up so much. So
Right.
it's a big chunk out of people's pay for sure.
And how much would that cost to hire an accountant like you to do a simple tax like that, like Jerry's on his first chapter?
Yeah, I mean, simple tax returns. I mean, I personally, I'm not taking on more clients because I'm too grumpy, okay? But other accountants, like if you have a simple return, you could just figure it out. Like you go to, some people can, if you're a student, actually, college, university students in Canada, you could file for free online. Most of the software, if you're a student, they let you file for free. It's not
Yeah.
so complicated. And remember to include your tuition credits and um, from your college university. So in my book, I have 29 tax tips. I give a lot of these tips in the book. But yeah, the cost to get your tax returns done from an accountant could be anywhere from, look, some might charge very low fees, $70, $100. Some will charge higher, 200, 300. It just depends.
Wow.
So there's a range. You can go to, there's H&R Block and Liberty Tax, and they have their fees as well. Um, I've always found the name Liberty Tax to be very ironic because it's really an oxymoron. Liberty Tax. Liberty means freedom, and tax is the opposite of
In
freedom when you think
slavery.
about it. Well, it sort of is, right? Because we don't have a choice. So Liberty Tax, I just found to be like a ridiculous kind of name for a tax firm.
Okay, we are in the midst of a pandemic, and millions of people are now working from home. So this is like a tax tip. Can people deduct now? Let's say I use my bedroom as my office now, which I don't know is 25% of my living expense. Can now a regular employee who usually cannot deduct their things like that? Can now they say, hey, Canada, Revenue Canada, I need to deduct this, and the other thing because now I'm working from home.
Yeah, there is a deduction for home office. If you're an employee, and you get a T4, what you have to do is to deduct home office, your employer has to give you a form at the end of the year, and they have to sign it, fill it out. It's called a T2200. Okay, T2200 form, T2200. They give you this form. You have to keep that form on file. You don't have to send it to CRA, you just have to keep it. And then on your tax return, you could deduct a home office expense. And that form on the tax return is called T777. Okay, so that's where you'll find it. T777, Statement of Employment Expenses, and allows you to claim a home office deduction. Now, if you're renting, you can claim a portion of your rent and your utilities. If you own your house, you cannot claim mortgage interest. Okay, so but you can claim utilities, you can claim some repairs and maintenance, and you can only claim property tax and insurance if you earn commissions. So it's a little complicated. So you have to be careful. But you can't claim mortgage insurance. Yeah. Now the CRA has hinted that they might make it simpler because people are saying, look, to require, like you said, millions of Canadians might be claiming this deduction this year, right? Now the employer has to fill out the T2200 form. It's a 2-page form. It's actually not so simple to fill out, and it's going to put a big burden on employers to fill out this form and give it to every single employee. So what people in the tax community are saying is the CRA should either create a modified, easier, simpler version of the T2200 form, or not even require the T2200 form and just have an extra box on the T4 slip. So every employee gets a T4 slip anyways, just put one extra box, check it off. It says if the employee is required to work from home because of COVID, and then they'll be able to claim the home office deduction. So we have to wait and see what CRA does. We don't know yet how exactly it will work. But yeah, millions of Canadians are going to be claiming this deduction this year. And this is another great example of how absurd the tax system is. Because my idea would be, instead of having millions of Canadians claiming a deduction, which they're going to have to calculate and add up all their utilities and add up their rent and add up this and add up that and keep receipts, and the CRA is going to audit these deductions, why not just lower the tax rate? That's it. Right. And it accomplishes the same thing. And that way everyone gets the tax savings, right? It's more fair because it will apply to everyone. It's simpler. No one needs to keep extra receipts or do extra work. The employer doesn't have to do extra work. You filing your tax return don't have to do extra work. And the CRA doesn't have to do extra work to audit the home office deduction. So if you're going to have, 3 million or 10 million or whatever it is Canadians claiming home office, why don't we just skip that, lower the tax rate? That's all. And you accomplish the same thing. So again, this is a great example how government doesn't think creatively, doesn't innovate, and doesn't think of ideas which make our lives easier. They make it harder.
Right. Okay. And being we are in November right now, it's close to the end of the year. There has been a very different year from any previous year. Is there anything a regular person should keep in mind, or can can adjust their tax? What adjustment can a person do right now before the year ends, taking into consideration COVID?
Right. So one of the things in Canada is that millions of Canadians received CERB, right? The Canada Emergency Response Benefit. And CERB is taxable income. So on your 2020 tax return, you must include that income in your tax return. You will receive a T4A slip from the CRA, just like EI is taxable. And if you receive EI, you get a slip from the government and you have to include it in your tax return. So people might have a small or even not so small tax bill come April when they file their 2020 tax return. So if you want to reduce that or you want to eliminate that, there are things you could do now, like maybe you make an RRSP contribution. If you have RRSP contribution room and you have money to do that, maybe you make some donation receipts, because donations, if you make them before the end of the year, you'll get a donation receipt and that will reduce your tax bill. So there are some things you can do. But the main thing for 2020 tax returns that people will have to watch out for is make sure you include the CERB that you received in your income. And if, depending on your level of income, if you have no other income if you have zero income and you received $8,000 of CERB, you won't pay any tax on it, so you're okay. But if you have like $30,000 of income and then you receive $8,000 of CERB, for example, that will be included in your income and you'll have to pay some tax on that. So it's important to kind of maybe now, before the end of the year, before April 30th, start trying to estimate what your tax bill might be. And there's some great tax calculators online. If you just Google, 2020 tax brackets, 2020 tax calculators, you can find one, and you could find the one for your province. There's actually a good one on my website. There's a link to one. If you go to grumpyaccountant.ca and click on resources, you'll find a link to a really good tax calculator. And you could kind of estimate. You put in your income, you see how much tax you owe, and then you put in the CERB income, add it, and then see the difference. So it's important to try and estimate that now. And if you do have a big tax bill from your CERB, maybe you want to start setting aside that money now if you're able to, or try and do other things to lower the tax bill.
Well, okay, so we are heading into a nightmare because first of all, those people who were receiving CERB, which was $2,000 per month and lasted for 6 months, if I'm not mistaken, that's $12,000. Those are the kind of people who do not put money aside for later on pay their tax bill. Those are the people who are struggling
Yeah.
to spend
Yeah.
every cent. So I'm sure none of those people say, oh, I'm going to put 10% of this money
Right.
aside for next year. So
Yeah.
next year, I don't know how many millions of people took advantage of this, but
Yeah.
I have no idea how the government is going to even think about claiming part of that money as part of their taxes.
It's going to be a big problem. You're absolutely right. And what replaced CERB, starting at the end of September, we have three new benefits that replaced CERB. The Canada CRB, Canada Response Benefit, and then CRCB, Canada, I think it's called Canada Response Caregiving Benefit, and then CRSB, the Sickness Benefit. So there's three different benefits. They're all on the CRA website. You could see which ones you may apply for. What the government's doing now is they're actually deducting 10% tax at source. So if you're supposed to get $500 a week, you'll see you're going to get $450 a week. They're taking the tax off at source, and that way for 2021, like for a year from now, some of the tax would already have been paid. But even for that, some people 10% might not be enough if they're in a higher tax. If it depending on the other income you have for the year. So yeah, it's gonna the next tax season coming up. It's gonna be a bit of a nightmare, and for not even just because of that reason, but the CRA will now be also auditing people's CERB. People who receive CERB have to be prepared. The CRA might want to make sure that you are actually eligible to receive CERB. So if you are making more than $1,000 a month and you receive CERB, you're going to have to pay that back. And be prepared for possible CRA audits to look into your situation to see if you really were eligible to receive CERB. So it's not going to be fun. It definitely won't be fun. And if I was designing the government's response to this, I would have done it differently. I would have based the emergency payments off of family income, because you could have a situation where one spouse makes $1 million a year and the other spouse is still eligible for CERB. Okay, so there was a study done by, I forget which organization, but apparently, and I forget the number, but billions of dollars of CERB payments were paid out to families, to individuals who are part of a family that has a very high level of family income. And so it wasn't, I think the government overdid it, but they kind of rushed it, which they felt they had to rush it in this situation because it was like an emergency. But I think they should have done it based on family income, and they probably also should have made it tax-free. I think in the United States, what they did was they automatically sent checks, which were considered tax-free, to families who had a family combined income below a certain level. And the government has that information from your tax returns. They already have it. That's how we pay Canada Child Benefits out. It's based on family income. So Service Canada should just look at what they should have done. Just look at the family income, and any family that was below a certain level of income, just pay their money and consider it tax-free, and then we wouldn't have to worry about any of this. So I think they did it in a way which added just more complexity, and it's going to cause more headaches later on.
And considering that there are millions of people who are going to be facing these kind of challenges, does the government have the resources to kind of I don't know, verify that this and that is correct, or they just going to be, I guess it's by random, a lottery. So they just pick people at random to see who abused the system and who didn't. No?
Yeah, the CRA will have to audit these claims that people made, and now a lot of people are being honest and they're voluntarily repaying because it was very complicated at first, and people thought they qualified, but they didn't qualify. Some senior citizens who are on fixed income qualify for this, applied, and they received CERB, and now they have to pay it back because you were only supposed to receive it if you had employment income in the 2019, if you had at least $5,000 of income. If you had zero income, or all your income was from like CPP and old age security, and I mean those people don't qualify for it. So now they qualified for other things there, but yeah. So the CRA will have to audit, and the current government in Canada doesn't really care if they have resources or not. They're running a deficit of $400 billion. It's actually the highest per Canada now has the highest deficit like per capita per GDP out of all other Western countries. So the current government will find the resources to do whatever they want, and
Right.
they're not really worried about that. Yeah.
Okay, now I see that the more we're speaking, the more grumpy you are getting in our conversation. So I'm going to close it up by asking you to give us one more time the name of your book and where can people follow you.
Okay, so the book is The Grumpy Accountant. I have a website, grumpyaccountant.ca, and there's some featured reviews of the book on that website, and all my videos and other podcasts I've recorded, they're all there. And you could buy the book on amazon.ca. There's an ebook and an audiobook available everywhere. The audiobook I actually narrated, so if you want to listen to me rant for 5.5 hours, you could buy the audiobook as well.
Well, I just had to add that although you seem very grumpy in this interview, the book is very friendly, it's easy to read, and you don't come across as grumpy as you did now in this interview. So, Neil, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.